Welcome in to the Rock Talk Studio, the podcast that answers the question, is this rock and roll book or documentary worth your time and money? Today, the spotlight falls on the book, The Beatle Who Vanished, which I'll review, rate, and determine if this book is for you. And then, as always, I'll leave you with all the book buzz and documentary news that just came out, including projects about Joni Mitchell, Sly Stone, the iconic Jersey club, the Stone Pony, and a documentary that I just watched the other night that could be the best music doc of 2024. I'm your host, Big Rick. Join me for an exclusive look into what's hitting the shelves and the screens, and get ready to rock your reading and viewing list. For 13 days, he was a Beatle. He actually saved the Beatles' first world tour. He was 24 years old, and then he was gone. And most people don't even know his name. How is it possible that drummer Jimmie Nicol could simply vanish after playing with the Beatles in 1964? With less than 24 hours to go before the Beatles headed out on their first big world tour, Ringo was taken to the hospital, and George Martin had to scramble to find a drummer to sit in for him while he recovered from laryngitis. Enter Jimmie Nicol, and that is where this book begins. Jimmie Nicol gets the call to join the Beatles, and that story alone, would make for a great book. But author Jim Berkenstadt has taken it much further. His mission with his book became a couple of things. To tell Nicol's whole story, especially because the record books have very little on what happened to him before and especially after he played those 8 shows with the Beatles. Most accounts of Nicol after the gigs with John, Paul, and George were that he disappeared. And the second thing that Berkenstadt focuses on is to find out if Jimmie Nicol is even alive. That kind of shows you right there how forgotten this guy is. Not going to spoil it because that's one of the book's strong points. It's written with a lot of mystery and deduction in its pages. The book, The Beatle Who Vanished, is the culmination of 6 years of research from the rock and roll detective himself, Jim Berkenstadt. Berkenstadt is an international authority on the Beatles. He served as historical consultant to Martin Scorsese's Emmy-winning film George Harrison, Living in the Material World. He also consults to the Beatles company Apple Corps and to the late George Harrison's estate. This guy, he knows his Beatles. And for those who have been with me for a while, first of all, thank you. I don't tell you enough, but I really appreciate the support and the love that this show gets. So seriously, thank you. But if you remember, I reviewed one of Jim's books last year. It was called Mysteries in the Music, where he took 8 rock and roll myths and closed the case on all the threads and the rumors and the misinformation that was out there. And it also won the Rock Talk Studios 2023 Book of the Year award for a book not about a band or a band member. It's a good one. And so isn't this book. Imagine being in the Beatles. I mean, driving through town in Australia in a motorcade with an estimated 300,000 people lining the streets, doing interviews with the guys as the drummer for the Beatles. He was actually known as the 5th Beatle. He's signing autographs, doing press releases, and waving for thousands of people outside the hotel balcony. Nicol got a really big taste of Beatlemania. And then, as quickly as it began, 13 days later, it was over. There's a really great picture in the book of sitting all alone one day after being mobbed and mauled as the 5th Beatle. And the picture shows him heading home. He's in an airport. There's no one around. There's no screaming fans. It's just him and his suitcase with a look on his face like, what the hell just happened? It's a crazy story. And you just feel for the guy. I don't know how anyone could handle that situation. Fascinating subject and very interesting investigation of all those who came in contact with Nicol and all the different threads pieced together by Berkenstadt. They don't call him the rock and roll detective for nothing. He did a really great job with this one. A lot of great unknown rock and roll history is in this book. Which Beatle helped out Nicol, which one didn't, or at least which one tried to after those Beatles gigs. Did George Martin actually blackball Nicol in his recording career? A band by the name of the Spotniks is big in this book. I never heard of them before, but they play a huge part in this story. And then all the different family members and musicians that came in and out of Nicol's life. The Beatle Who Vanished is the first historical account of Jimmie Nicol and is being reissued to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the famous 1964 tour. This is a new version, and it allowed Berkenstadt to finally solve the mystery of if Jimmie Nicol is actually alive. There's extra chapters, and they provide kind of a recap of the story and all the added clues that Berkenstadt dug up to come up with his conclusion. Again, I'm not going to spoil it for you, so you're going to have to read the book to find out what the rock and roll detective comes up with. Now it's time for me to come to my conclusion, as I'm going to look at if this book is for you while stamping the official Rock Talk Studio rating on the book, The Beatle Who Vanished. To me, there's one big question that hangs over this book when it comes to me giving out a rating, because this is where I try to be as broad as possible and really look at what type of person is going to enjoy this. Let me first set up the rating system before I get to the question. I do a 1 through 4 rating system. A 1 is a front row center. This is a very unique book. It doesn't come around a lot. It has something that no other book has. Completely blows me away. Very unique. That's a 1, front row center. A 2 is a floor seat. Highly recommended. Good book. A lot of great things in there. Something that I would definitely tell people about to go out and get immediately. A 3 is a loge seat, and that's okay. It could be good. It could be not so good. It could be all right. That's a loge. You're all right. But 4, you're in the nosebleeds, baby. So as I'm reading this book, I couldn't help but ask myself this question. If you're not a Beatles fan, or maybe not a Beatles super fan, are you really going to find value in reading this book? And that's why I give this book a 2. It is a floor seat. You're right up close with this one because it's a fascinating put together of Jimmie Nicol's story. This is a story about a person that had one of the greatest musical experiences in the history of rock and roll. No one else did what Nicol did. This is such a deep story that is so much more than a Beatles story, and it is so well done with the keen writing from Berkenstadt. By the way, Berkenstadt's other books are part of the library and archive collection at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's an historian, and he takes an historian approach to this project, and it's what takes the story over the top. I think any rock and roll fan is really going to enjoy this book. It's fascinating. If you're a Beatles fan, there is no way you should be missing this one. Go out and get it. Great book, The Beatle Who Vanished by the rock and roll detective, Jim Berkenstadt. People ask me for recommendations all the time, and I always tell them just go to the archives, check out all those past shows. There's a lot of great stuff. Here's a couple of them. If you're looking for a good documentary about some great behind-the-scenes talent, the doc, The Immediate Family, that one pulls the curtain back on the 4 musicians who created all that great 70s and 80s LA sound. They served as the band for Stevie Nicks, Jackson Browne, Warren Zevon, Don Henley, Carly Simon, David Crosby. That's just a few of the names on that list. That list is long. It's kind of a sequel to the classic Wrecking Crew documentary. It's directed by the same guy, Danny Tedesco. Or how about a book about an underrated rock and roll talent, King Curtis? The book and the writer, Timothy Hoover, wrote a great book, King Curtis and His Immortal Saxophone. Favorite thing about this book is the 20 years of passion Hoover put into writing this and how that devotion to this story plays out across every page, giving King Curtis some long overdue recognition and respect. I really enjoyed this book, and you can dig into past shows in the archives. These are just a few recommendations that are in there. There's also reviews on projects about Leon Russell, Geddy Lee, Anita Pallenberg, Carlos Santana documentary, Bruce Springsteen, so much good stuff in the archives. I'm positive you'll find something new and great to check out. Speaking of recommendations, I always like to recommend a good rock and roll podcast, and I go to this podcast when I'm looking for new music, new songs. The podcast is called Songs That Don't Suck, and the host, Mark, goes through a ton of new music, and he just makes sure he pulls out the good stuff. It's where I go to get information about new music. Here's Mark's trailer for his podcast. Let's take a listen.
What's up, music nerds? Are you tired of wading through a sea of mediocre music, desperately seeking to find a glimmer of greatness? You're in luck. My name is Mark, and I am the host of the podcast, Songs That Don't Suck. Each week, I scour the depths of new music playlists to unearth hidden gems that defy the trends and deliver pure sonic bliss. No matter the genre, if it doesn't suck, it's on my radar. So find us on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe today. And as always, keep searching for and listening to Songs That Don't Suck.
All right, I know what else that doesn't suck, and that's all the news about new books and new documentaries that are coming out. Got some really cool news this week. Gonna jump right into that next. All right, it's time for the news, all that book buzz and documentary news. Here it comes. Let's start with a new book that just came out. A book about Joni Mitchell from celebrated NPR music critic Ann Powers, where she explores the life and career of Joni Mitchell. The new book is called Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell. Here's a cool quote I saw from Powers herself about the book. What you're about to read is not a standard account of the life and work of Joni Mitchell. Instead, it's a tale of long journeying through a life that changed popular music, of a homesick wandering, forging ahead on routes of her own invention, and of me on her trail, heading towards the ringing of her voice. All right, I think I'm sold with that. I like a different take on a familiar subject. This sounds like it's got that written into it. Someone who takes a different angle, I like that, and I'm looking forward to this. Plus, I like a lot of Powers' work on NPR. Traveling on the Path of Joni Mitchell is 443 pages, and it comes out on June 11th. All right, there's another new book that came out called I Don't Want to Go Home, The Oral History of the Stone Pony. In 1970, Asbury Park, New Jersey, two bouncers, Jack Rulg and Butch Pileka, opened up a bar where no one really wanted to go or be, and they named it the Stone Pony and turned it into a rock club that Springsteen himself wanted to call home. How did the Stone Pony beat the odds to survive? How did it become a rock and roll institution? And how did it to continue to inspire and influence rock talents like Springsteen, Southside Johnny, who I saw there one time, the Ramones, Stevie Van Zant, and Patti Smith, to name a few? Here's a snippet from the press release about the book. The story of the Stone Pony, charted in this detailed oral history, is the chronicle of a proud and unique cultural mecca, blooming in a down but not yet out tough town. As author Nick Corasanti reveals, the stories of Asbury Park and the Stone Pony are that of modern America itself, a place of battered hopes, big dreams, and dogged resilience. I Don't Want to Go Home, The Oral History of the Stone Pony is 320 pages and comes out on June 4th. I just got my copy in the mail. I'm really looking forward to reading this about such an iconic place. Speaking of iconic places, I have to mention this doc. I just finished it up the other night, and it's not a rock and roll doc, but it is a tremendous documentary about music. It's called Stax. It's about R&B and soul, about Stax Records. I cannot say enough good stuff about this documentary. There is so much in this. There's such great footage. There's such great music. There's such a great story. There's so much cultural relevance. It's a 3-parter. It's on HBO. It's running now. I can't suggest this enough to everybody to watch this documentary. It's amazing. The story is just mind-blowing. What was accomplished there in that small town. Stax Records put out some of the most amazing music. Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, Isaac Harris, Booker T and the MGs, just to name a few. Again, not rock and roll, but could be the best documentary I've seen so far in 2024. But maybe this doc could be in the running too. I actually watched it the other night. It's called Disciple. It's about Stephen Van Zandt, and it's running on HBO Max. And I have to say, it's really, well, let's not get into it right now. There's just way too much to unpack about this doc. Let's make it the spotlight title on the next show, and I'll do a full review and rating on next week's podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Love talking rock and roll and getting a chance to recommend a few titles for you. I hope you found a few things that you might be interested in checking out. Just because the episode is over does not mean the conversation is. You can join me on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube for more book and doc talk. All right, tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll see you next time in the Rock Talk studio.